Hi, welcome to Bookies. I'm Bear. You've reached the only YouTube channel that when you subscribe and this channel gets monetized, 100% of the proceeds will go to literacy programs and public libraries. All you have to do is subscribe, watch the videos, and get some great book recommendations. With your help, we can get there together. Today's book review is about Never Flinch by Stephen King. I'll begin with a segment that I'm going to call Stephen King Jokes That You Hope You Never Hear Again. So when I was a naval officer, there was a guy that shined my shoes. And he didn't really enjoy Stephen King books, but he loved The Shining. All right, I'm a dad, so you're going to get a dad joke on occasion. That bad joke being out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Never Flinch is Stephen King's latest novel. It's published in 2025. And I have read a couple Stephen King novels, but never his horror novels. And as a matter of fact, I hadn't even read a horror novel until last week. And I have read thousands of books. The problem, if there is one, and I don't think there really is that Never Flinch is really not a horror novel. It's the latest in a series of novels that Stephen King wrote where the main character is Holly Gibney. I don't think you criticize a novel because you had a certain expectation about what genre it would be in, and then you were surprised that it wasn't in that. So I'm going to set that aside, and it doesn't really come in as a negative, I would say, for this novel. The underlying premise of this novel is about a serial killer who believes that not the guilty should suffer for their crimes, but that the innocent should suffer on behalf of the guilty. No, the guilty should remain alive so that they can suffer the shame and guilt that comes with innocents dying on their behalf. Now, query whether a guilty person that committed a murder is going to feel shame and guilt, but nonetheless, that is the premise behind this particular novel. As a former prosecutor, it never would have occurred to me that the innocent should suffer on behalf of the guilty. However, interesting premise and very intriguing. So as I started the novel, I was keeping this kind of backward thinking in my mind. The serial killer storyline intertwines with another, which is about a vigilante who is stalking a celebrity speaker, a feminist celebrity speaker, who is in favor of the right to choose abortion, and this particular vigilante sees no hypocrisy in desiring to kill the feminist speaker, even though purportedly he's pro-life. Holly Gibney is acting as security for the feminist celebrity speaker, and at the same time, she's assisting in the investigation of the serial killer so they can track down that serial killer and keep that serial killer from killing again. And so in this respect, Holly is actually the pivot between the two storylines, and she is the reason that they commingle. As to the style of writing, it's everything that you would expect in a King novel. It's very typical Stephen King. If you've read any of his novels before, there's going to be no different approach here than he's had in other novels. And the pacing is adequate enough that it builds tension to what ultimately becomes a rather shocking conclusion. If you enjoy novels that really promote the notion that pace should build to a climactic conclusion, this novel is for you. And I very much enjoyed this aspect of the novel. In other King novels I've read, I noticed that King really enjoys playing innocence against wickedness. So the more innocent the protagonist, the more wicked the bad guy is, in a sense. And to manifest that innocence, King uses a side story here, which is just chock full of classic Americana. In this instant, it's Sister Betty, a soul singer who's reviving her career and going on tour. I really like how King uses contrasts between goodness and evil. And that aspect of this novel, I think, is really, really well played out. While the plot device of contrasting pure good against evil is really excellent writing, I think the way King deploys it in this particular novel fell a bit short. The side story of Sister Betty was really just kind of, in my opinion, lacking. It clearly was used to move all the characters together for the climactic ending. However, I found Sister Betty quite tedious. In this case, Holly's friend Barbara gets involved with the revival of Sister Betty's career and her tour, and frankly, Barbara's aspirations to join and sing with somebody she idolizes just aren't mine. Unfortunately, it was kind of dull. Given the creative genius of Stephen King, I think he could have found a much better side story that would have been the device to bring all the characters together at the end. Frankly, something a little bit more scary, or something that's going to build tension a little more. And in this case, it just kind of didn't happen. If anything, it really slowed the pacing of the novel down. As I read it, I thought, well, there's probably at least 100 pages here that didn't really need to be in this particular book. And he could have just done something better. And I think what was lacking here was editing, an objective viewpoint outside of Stephen King himself that could have told him that. And what was missing in the novel was, well, for lack of a better phrase, the gore and horror that you typically associate with a Stephen King novel. What I did like about this novel were the characters. The serial killer in this novel, Trigg, is the product of being abused as a child, and he has his own shame and guilt. And I think those divergent aspects of his character really position the reader well to understand his thinking and why he feels like he needs to take recourse in violence. This character is well crafted. Another character, the vigilante, who is seeking to stalk and then kill the celebrity feminist speaker, also a very well crafted character. Essentially, that character is really creepy. And, that's kind of a Stephen King thing, so it works here, right? We're never really given an explanation as to why this particular individual sees no hypocrisy from being quote unquote pro-life, but then seeking to kill somebody who represents values that he does not accept. Notwithstanding, I think King hit the mark with this character. After all, we shouldn't expect creepy people who are stalking others in order to kill them to have consistent thinking, right? And aside from the characters, which, like I said, are very well crafted, I think the other strength of this novel is just Stephen King. Stephen King is a genius at taking several different threads in a novel and bringing them all together to a really satisfying and believable conclusion. In conclusion, I think there were a couple missed opportunities in this particular novel. As I mentioned before, that alternative side story with Sister Betty, he could have found a better story that was more intriguing, more dynamic. Unfortunately, he didn't do so. And despite the excellent character development and Stephen King's excellent storytelling ability, I think this one just fell kind of flat. It's better than average, but notwithstanding, it's certainly not his best work. To that end, I'm going to give Never Flinch 3.5 stars out of 5. Excellent storytelling, very satisfying conclusion. The characters are well developed, but I felt like Never Flinch lacked pace, and I think that was due to a very unsatisfying side story in Sister Betty. Remember, if you like this content, give a like on the video, and please subscribe, because your subscription is going to get you some pretty good book reviews, and it's a no-cost way to give to charity. So with that, I'm going to wish you a great day. God bless.